The majority of the Egyptian population would have been the tanned, olive-skinned people. Egypt was an African civilization, but it wasn't living in a vacuum. It was in a specific geolocation that connected the Middle East, Asia, Africa, and Southern Europe.
Hey guys, so today we're going to do something a bit different. We're going to expose the lack of rigor and intellectual integrity in the research of the Metatron's video on ancient Egypt. We're also going to casually debunk some of the ideas he managed to spread in his very popular video on the race of the ancient Egyptians. Some of you may think that he deserves no attention, but I would beg to differ there, since his video on the so-called truth about the ancient Egyptians got a lot of attention and praise. Hell, his video is probably the most popular video on this subject on the platform. So as someone who cares about our history, I find it important to address some of the fallacies and misinformation employed in the video. Quick disclaimer, I have nothing against the Metatron. I am simply someone who is concerned with the objective truth, logical arguments, facts, and the spread of coherent and honest information. I believe Metatron is also concerned about these same items. So if by some miracle he manages to watch this video, Metatron, it's nothing personal at all. So with that said, let's jump into this video. So what we're going to do in this video is that I'm going to play segments with which I have an issue and counter-argue or expose a fallacy or debunk if necessary. I will also highlight certain points that he made that I happen to agree with, though there are very few in this particular video. Okay, so let's play the first clip of the video.
The question were the ancient Egyptians black is actually quite complicated. It's multi-layered. I'll try to bring as much clarity as possible in this video, as often the matter is rooted on a variety of political expectations, agendas, and the imposition of current perspectives and attitudes to depict and interpret past events in order to bend them in one's favor. A cauldron of personal bias and lies on any sides of the spectrum.
So Metatron starts by saying that the question is a complicated one and multi-layered, yet he proceeds by making, in my opinion, a poorly researched video on a multi-layered issue, as he himself stated. His video claims to summarize a multi-centenary old debate in what, 18 minutes? This here is already an issue, because this debate has taken place in scholarly circles several times, with one side claiming Egypt was black and the other claiming it wasn't. Now, as in every argument, each side has reasons as to why they claim what they claim. Therefore, the critical mind that aims to summarize the debate shall represent both sides of the arguments properly and without bias, to present a balanced and accurate picture of the debate for the viewer to judge. But as you will see in this video, Metatron fails to do this. His video actually exposes his bias against people who claim that ancient Egypt was black, as you will see shortly.
Cleopatra. I think everybody has heard of her, but I don't know if you've heard that there is a group of people that say that she was black because she was the queen of Egypt. Egypt is in, Africa, therefore she was the queen of Africa, she was African, and she was black. And if you disagree, yes, you guessed it. Check this tweet out. I am not sorry to tell you all, but Rihanna definitely has that role owned. Gaga and AJ shouldn't have even been in the running. Honestly, if a black woman ain't playing Cleopatra, then nobody should play the African Egyptian Queen Cleopatra, period.
As you see here, Metatron goes to find a guy on Twitter that is claiming extreme stuff that do not at all represent the arguments for a black Egypt. We know too well that by the time Cleopatra was queen of Egypt, the land known as Kemet, that is ancient Egypt's real name, was no longer. The guy on Twitter isn't a scholar, Metatron. There are scholars like Dr. Diop, Ivan van Sertima, Chancellor Williams, Professor Henry Clark, and so many others that have books written on this topic and present argumentations in those books for a black African ancient Egypt. Why don't you address those arguments? This is hardly the way we do academic work. It's funny how you only choose to present such weak and extreme claims as the arguments for a black Egypt and somehow failed to include the very many works of scholars who argued that Egypt was a black African civilization. A quick search on Wikipedia will help you know the scholars that have spoken for and against this hypothesis, right? A quick search on Wikipedia. It's not that hard. You go on Google, you type ancient Egypt race controversy, and boom, there, a full article with scholars agreeing that it was black and scholars agreeing that it wasn't. Anyhow.
Cleopatra came from a dynasty of conquering Greeks. Her ancestor was a general of Alexander the Great's army. She was born in Egypt, but she wasn't a native Egyptian. She was Greek, her father was from Cyprus, and therefore she didn't share the same phenotypic traits with the local population. All rulers from the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt from 305 BC to 30 BC would have been Greek. We don't know exactly in details what she looked like. She was described as being very attractive and very intelligent, but we do know that she would have looked like a Southern European, a Greek of the time. Now, I happen to be a Southern European. I'm from the Mediterranean. I'm Sicilian. I happen to be on the pale side. Maybe she looked like me. Maybe her skin would have been a bit more tanned, perhaps olive color. Still, she wouldn't have looked like a native African Egyptian. And we've got statues to show her hair and face structure and nose structure together with some coins. Again, clearly Greek.
Yes, Cleopatra was Greek and most very likely white. Now, how do we know she was white? DNA? No, just her statue and the land of origin of her ancestors and other ancient representations. I personally find them very convincing. And also, notice how eager he is to say that her statue has Greek phenotypes and thereby jump to the conclusion that she must have been white. Yet he fails to do so with the ancient Egyptian wall paintings and statues throughout his video. Also, when Diop and many others see and claim that the ancient Egyptian statues have African phenotypes, they start saying things like, well, statues cannot be used to determine race. Yet Metatron just used the statue to determine the race of Cleopatra, and they do the same with the Greeks. How do we know they were white? It's their statues mainly. They were like, oh well, you know, they lived in Europe, and right now in Europe is white people, and look at their statues. They look just like white people today, so, right. Look, the double standard. There are countless ancient Egyptian statues that clearly depict African phenotypes. Artists will tell you that. But what do people say for ancient Egypt to prove the race, to show the race? They say we need DNA evidence. But for Cleopatra and the ancient Greeks, no need. The statue will suffice. Here is a quote from an artist who visited and drew the Sphinx of Giza. His name was Vivant Denon. He was a French artist who went to Egypt during the Napoleon invasion of Egypt, and he was asked to draw the Sphinx. And here is what he said. Though its proportions are colossal, the outline is pure and graceful. The expression of the head is mild, gracious, and tranquil. The character is clearly African, but the mouth and lips, of which are thick as most Negroes, has a softness and delicacy of execution truly admirable. There is a link in the description if you want to find the original quote. The character is African, as he just stated there. The lips are thick. Clearly, one can tell race from a drawing or a sculpture, especially when one knows that the sculptures are accurate representations. Vivant Denon is not the only one who noticed this. Several others did. Experts such as the Count de Volnay could not help but be astonished at the striking African phenotypes he saw on the Sphinx. Another one is Lepsius, who said, "Whenever we are looking for the Egyptians, we only find typical Negroes." No. That means the Egyptians are Negroes, Lepsius. That's what it means. Yeah. Artists who draw and sculpt will tell you that there are traits that distinguish the races.
Okay, fantastic, but what about all of the other pharaohs? What about the actual general population, the Egyptians? What did they look like? To answer this professionally in the most accurate way possible, we have to examine Egyptian art, understand how they utilized color to represent themselves and their neighbors, and we'll address the term Kemet, the word the Egyptians used to refer to Egypt. We'll talk about an article that deals with the first successful genomic testing on ancient Egyptian mummies, where the mitochondrial genomes of 90 mummies were taken, and we'll discuss the results together.
Okay, so now we know what he's addressing in his video: the art, the word Kemet, and the DNA evidence from the nature study. Good.
The only way to answer this is to make sure that you and I both know what we mean exactly with the word black. And I've noticed that some academics these days love dancing around this one because it's controversial and they don't want to offend anyone. So what do? They say, oh, but the ancient Egyptians didn't have these modern concept of black people and white people. That's a modern construct. So they were neither. That's dodging the question. So let me be 100% crystal clear here. Did the entirety of the population of Egypt, or the majority of the population of Egypt, look like this handsome man? No.
Let's get this over with. I'm sorry, this is the guy? Jerry? Hold on.
So he mentioned the way the scholars usually dodge this question, which is a perspective I agree with. I raised the same issue in a previous video. He also mentioned the importance of knowing what he means by black. So he then proceeds by showing a picture of actor Mahershala Ali. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. He's an American actor. I don't know if you watched the movie Green Book. Nice movie. So an American actor. So most likely a descendant of the Niger-Congo people. So Metatron seems to be playing into the blacks are only Niger-Congo people argument. But we know that is nonsense. Black Africans come in many shades. The black Africans in the East and West may have some differences in phenotypes and complexion, but they are still all black Africans. There isn't only one type of black African, as these people seem to think. There are several, but they all share one common ancestry since they all come from the Horn of Africa. In any case, what Metatron should know is that Mahershala Ali's type can be found in ancient Egypt. Yeah, joke's on you, man. Joke's on you, Metatron. His type can be found in ancient Egypt. The pharaoh Ramses III of the 20th dynasty was a Niger-Congo type, as you can see by his statue here. His depictions reveal that. But not only, his haplogroup is also related to the Niger-Congo people. So stop misleading people and do more research, please. The ancient Egyptians were perceived as black Africans by people who saw them. Did you know that? Their art shows typical African facial features and skin coloration. As you can see here, Ethiopians don't look exactly like the actor he showed. Are we supposed to conclude then that they are not to be considered black? Ethiopians, mind you, are the people that many experts claim resemble the ancient Egyptians the most. Jean-François Champollion, known as the father of Egyptology, said so himself. Is Metatron aware that the ancient Greeks unanimously called the ancient Egyptians black? It was like a casual thing in their literature everywhere. They were referred to as black. They were even drawn on vases as black. Are you aware of this? I don't think so. Given the seemingly poor research of your video, I highly doubt it. If you didn't even include one scholar who presents solid arguments for a black Egypt, I doubt that he did proper research for his video. Was his aim even to present both sides properly? I doubt. I seriously doubt. But that's just speculation.
The ancient Egyptians were a multi-ethnic African civilization. It was multi-ethnic because of its very geographical position, a connection between Africa, the Mediterranean basin, and Asia, a strategic location on the crossroads of continents. The Egyptian civilization flourished around the Nile River, which was a cultural conduit of civilization. There is diversity in the skin of the Egyptians. Through time and space, the ethnic percentages will differ depending on what area of Egypt and which era.
The old Egypt is a multi-ethnic society argument. No serious scholar is denying the presence of other ethnicities in Egypt. Instead, they argue that Egypt was a product of the indigenous black African populations that lived in the Nile Valley, coming from further south. And those southern areas of the Nile Valley were undeniably inhabited by black Africans. This thesis is supported by studies showing that ancient Egypt was developed indigenously. Also, linguistic evidence, ancient testimonies from Greek scholars, and the archaeological documents from the Nacta culture, who are believed to have been at the origin of the dynastic Egypt, that is the Egypt of the pharaohs, all support the idea that Kemet, that is ancient Egypt, was originated by one indigenous black African culture and that the other Eurasian ethnic groups joined in later either by immigration or conquest, since some of them were already settled in the Delta. What we know is that dynastic Egypt originated in Upper Egypt, that is the south of Egypt. It's a bit like the USA today. It is a multi-ethnic society, but we all know that their culture and country were originated by European Englishmen and not by all the ethnicities that live there today. So that's the same case for ancient Egypt. Although there were multiple ethnicities living there, that doesn't mean that they all were at the origin of the same civilization. What we argue is that the culture known as ancient Egypt was originated by the people of the Nacta culture who were black. They came from Upper Egypt and Lower Nubia. The evidence is there to support this. Just keep watching my videos.
Egypt is not disconnected from the rest of Africa, and it is absolutely imperative to fully appreciate the complexity and connectivity of such a geographical area. However, the ancient Egyptians did acknowledge and recognize the physical differences between them and their neighbors, specifically utilizing skin tone as one of the major distinguishing factors. Already disproving this idea pushed by some people that the ancient Egyptians didn't even see a difference in skin tone and that that's only something that we modern people see. Probably humankind has been noticing that difference since prehistorical period. These classifications are indeed fluid, but I think we all know what we mean when we say black. Like this guy. Here is what the Egyptians said. Look at this image. To the right, you see how the Egyptians represented themselves. The black gentleman is representing a Nubian, basically a member of the very prominent and very powerful and advanced kingdom of Kush, which was south of Egypt, and those are representations of an Asiatic and a Libyan. Of course, it's important to take into consideration the cultural and commercial and religious exchanges that happened between the kingdom of Kush and Egypt. Of course, a certain percentage of Nubians, which will differ depending on which area of Egypt we are talking about, will have lived among the Egyptians, but the Egyptians do represent themselves with this image, with this specific color.
Yes, Egypt is in Africa. Thank you for acknowledging a fact. Most Egyptologists seem to think that Egypt is not in Africa. He mentions that Egypt made clear differences between themselves and their neighbors. Well, let me tell you that that is true for their Mediterranean and Asian neighbors, but it isn't true for their Kushite neighbors and their other neighbors to the south. I made an entire video debunking that idea. You can go watch it up here or down in the description. There are multiple depictions where the Nubians and Egyptians share the same complexion, facial features, and cultural features. That image he shows of the races of men known to ancient Egypt is, first of all, a reconstruction of an image from the tomb of Seti I, and second, the image is usually misused to claim that the Egyptians saw themselves very differently from the Nubians and that they did not see a difference of complexion among Nubians. A lie. And notice that he used a certain image there of Nubians. Well, that image is from the tomb of Re, and if you watch the complete wall of the tomb of Re, Metatron just misinformed a whole bunch of people. He simply misled a whole bunch of people to think that, yeah, that's what the Nubians all look like. There is evidence in the tomb of Re and the tomb of Ramses III that debunk those ideas altogether. There, the Egyptians often shared the same complexion as their Nubian neighbors. Please go check the complete wall of the Tomb of Re wall paintings. Or you can also check my video dissecting the whole wall, if you enjoy my sweet voice. Just kidding here. Go check the complete wall on Google, or you can check my video. They're both free, so yeah.
And with color and art, we enter a whole new range of topics that I'd like to hopefully simplify for this video. How did the Egyptians use and create color, and why do Egyptian women almost always look lighter in skin than their men? Women's skin instead was most of the time represented with a mixture of yellow and white. And the reason or the explanation to this is because women tended to work the field a lot less than men. They tended to stay inside, and therefore their skin was lighter. If the difference in skin tone between men and women is darker or lighter depending on how much time they spend outside, then it suggests that even the darker tones we see are mostly a tan rather than the actual natural color that all Egyptians would have.
The skin of the women was almost always yellow? Let's take a look at some wall paintings, shall we?
Was there any inner and sometimes hidden meaning within color itself? Well, each color was created by mixing various naturally occurring elements, and each became standardized in time in order to ensure a uniformity in artwork. An Egyptian male was always depicted with a reddish-brown skin, which was achieved by mixing a certain amount of standard red paint with standard brown. Experts say that this color was chosen because it was a realistic representation of the average Egyptian. So it is possible that a light brown would be a good representation when it comes to what the ancient Egyptian skin looked like. If they were all black in the sense of a Nubian, they would not represent the Nubians and themselves differently in art, and of course a Nubian's skin color is gonna be black, whether he stays inside or outside?
Okay, there is a lot to unpack here. The first is the metaphorical conventional skin color argument. This argument simply does not stand when one examines the wall paintings of ancient Egypt closely. We already addressed this in a previous video, the reddish-brown color too, which is simply a shade of brown that one can find in most African societies, such as the Hausa people, the Fulani, the Tukulur, the Kenyans, the Rwandese, the Ethiopians, and many others. My African people will understand what I am referring to here. Metatron claims that the colors are expressing a tan rather than an actual skin complexion, yet he has no doubt about the color of everything else. Also, this idea of a conventional tan is a fairy tale invented by Cherubini Salvatore, a companion of Champollion the Young. Metatron has no evidence to support his claim there, unless he presents a papyrus of an ancient Egyptian artist claiming that the color used on Egyptian wall paintings of men and women are conventional representations of tanning and that they don't represent reality. Then we could admit the evidence. And as Diop said, and I quote here, "Why should there only be one conventional color among so many natural ones? Even more perplexing is, why should their conventional color be a Negro color instead of something closer to their complexion? Why? Because of a tan? Come on. We know the tan argument is nonsense. The Egyptians worked outside without shirts. That is not the case for the current population of Egypt, which is always covering its body from head to toe because of the harsh sun. Only black people in this world can live there and work outside without protecting their skin because they have high melanin content that is already protecting their skin from the UV rays. There is no way a Eurasian people can live in Egypt and walk around bare chest and be fine with it. No, that's not what you see in North Africa today, but that's what you see in ancient Egypt. People working outside without shirts and always wearing a cloth around the waist. They used to dress like the Nubians when they were working outside. And in his video he mentions a Nubian will be black whether he's inside or outside. An Egyptian too, Metatron, an Egyptian too, as the evidence seems to suggest. This idea of tan is your invention, or one scholar's invention. There is no ancient Egyptian papyrus that is talking about that conventional color that is expressing a tan. That is an invention of modern scholarship, just to avoid linking that color to Africa. I mean, we're in Africa, but everybody refuses to accept that that skin is just the brown skin of many African people. The color of the skin is an actual one. There are many depictions of noble women in tomb paintings that have them depicted with brown skin and not yellow. A brilliant example of this is the image of Hatshepsut next to a beautiful Nigerian woman. And I know in a previous video I said she was American. I was mistaken. Thanks to a viewer who corrected me in the comment section of one of my videos, I learned she was Nigerian, which adds even more weight to the evidence. Look at her. Look at this woman and look at Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut was a pharaoh. She was a woman. So by Metatron's logic there, she should have been yellow on this depiction, but her skin is brown and it is the same complexion as this African woman next to her. Even the phenotypes are the same. The complexion is the same, the facial features are the same. It's almost like she is a sister to the queen. Amazing stuff. The Egyptians had brown skin akin to that of the East Africans, the Caribbeans, or the Hausa people. Not a freaking tan, man. Not a freaking tan. Simply dishonest to bring up this tanning argument. They just had brown skin. Face the facts. Metatron also only conveniently uses certain ancient Egyptian wall paintings and statues that fit his narrative, as so many documentaries and other videos do. When one looks at the actual pharaohs from Dynasty 1 to Dynasty 22 or 25, most of those statues have African phenotypes and skin color. Same for the wall paintings. And he says he's concerned about the truth and objectivity.
So what about the term Kemet? Well, Kemet has been used again by some people trying to push this idea that all Egyptians were black and it was a black civilization, because they say that it means the land of the black, and therefore if the Egyptians refer to their own land as this is the land of the black, then it means that they consider themselves black. But it's interesting that the people that I've read in forums, they say this, but then a minute before that they actually say, oh, but the Egyptians did never refer to themselves or other people as black and white and brown. That's a modern construct. And this already shows you lack of intellectual intellectual honesty, because you can't say that the Egyptian didn't use black, brown and white to describe people and then a minute afterwards use it when it comes to the translation of the word Kemet when it's convenient to you. Kemet meant black land, meaning that was the color of the land, the soil. Scholars generally believe that this name derived from the fertile soil that was left over when the Nile flood receded in August.
So, Kemet, the black land or the land of the blacks? Does it apply to the people or to the land? Probably the fertile soil, and also very likely by extension to the skin color of the originators of those words who came from the Horn of Africa, as linguistic and archaeological evidence seems to suggest. Also, here is something interesting. When we talk about Kemet, we have to look at the hieroglyphs, right? So for the scholars' argument of Kemet, the black land, it is a defendable position, right? So you have Kem or Kemet, which is the first part here of this symbol, like the charcoal sign and the half circle. That means Kemet. And it is followed by a bird and a circle with a cross in the middle. The circle with the cross in the middle signifies a place that is inhabited. So if we take it literally, Kemet means black, and it is followed by this inhabited place determinative. So literally it would translate to the black place that is inhabited, right? So something like that. So yes, you can translate it to the black land, and as scholars agree, it refers to the fertile soil of the land. Now, here is something interesting that Diop pointed out. Diop found a place where Kemet, that is the charcoal hieroglyph with the half circle at the bottom of it, was followed by a man and a woman sitting and 3 dots. So the man and the woman sitting there followed by those 3 dots signifies people. It signifies people. It's a determinative for a collective of people. So if we take the terms literally, this would mean Kemt followed by people. Kemt means the black. So the charcoal hieroglyph, it's read Kem, and the half circle there is a particle that is added to signify the feminine, and it's read T. So together, those 2 signs read Kemet or Kemt, but people usually read it Kemet. Then you have the woman and the man sitting with the 3 dots. That has no sound. It's just a representative of people, right? So it just means people. So if we translate it literally, Kemt would mean the black, or in French it will be la noire, because in English there's no feminine, right, for such words. It just means the black. So you take Kemet, which means the black, plus people, literally it means the black people. Now this is what I find the most interesting. This particular Kemet here was used in a hymn of glory of Sesostris III. The term used literally means the black people, as we've just seen, and it is referring to the inhabitants of ancient Egypt, of Kemet, the black land. Now, while this term was not commonly used by the Egyptians to refer to themselves, as they probably didn't base their identity on the color of their skin, just like most human groups, by the way, like the Bantu, we knew, I am a Bantu, so we knew we were black, but we were calling ourselves Muntu, or Bantu, or Mtu, which means human, or people, or humans. Bantu means humans, and Tu means human, just like the ancient Egyptians who used Ramet, which means human. However, this doesn't mean that the ancient Egyptians didn't notice their skin color. And as this hymn shows, the Egyptians referred to themselves as the black people, thereby equating their looks to that of their fertile soil. The poet of the hymn most likely noticed that the skin color of his people had the color of the fertile soil, or the color that was closer to the color of the fertile soil, that is, to the color black. Just like Europeans before racism scarcely referred to themselves as white, as opposed to the term human or man. We are man, or French, we are the French, we are the English. They never used to say like, we are the white. No, that racial term came in late, way late. However, they still knew their skin was a fair skin. White was used in poems and stories, such as Snow White, right? Referring to the skin of the princess. So they already knew that their skin could be referred to as white, especially the very pale skin, because those poets noticed that their skin was closer to the color white. Likewise, the poet of the hymn of glory to Sesostris most likely noticed that the skin color of his people was closer to that of the fertile black soil of the Nile Valley. I hope this makes sense. I hope you managed to follow me here. So yeah, the Kemet followed by the sign of the land that is inhabited most likely means the black land, referring to the soil. However, the Kemet that is followed by the determinative of a collective of people definitely means the black people. The scholar's position is not defendable there, because if Kem, which means black, applies to the determinative that follows it, as in the black land, then if the determinative of collective of people is following the term Kem, which means black, then the meaning, the translation should be the black people and not the Egyptians. I don't even consider this the strongest argument for a black African origin to ancient Egypt. I mean, there is a lot of visual evidence that everybody just wants to ignore, or the common practice of the scholars is to just make up fairy tales, all in order to avoid what is in front of them. I mean, Dr. Sheikanta Diop did a melanin test on some mummies and brought forth tangible evidence of them being black. They had high melanin content, and high melanin content means you're black. That's basically what it means. Look, some might disagree with me on this, but what Diop brought as evidence was far more tangible than this Kemet argument. But the Kemet argument still stands, you know, especially the one followed by the determinative of the people. Whatever the matter, everyone who saw the ancient Egyptians, from the Greeks to the Romans to the Jews, all called them black. Yeah.
Now some of you might ask, why bother with ancient mummies at all? Why don't you just check and analyze the DNA on modern day Egyptians? And the thing is that in order to do that, you would have to have a perfect genetic continuity over thousands of years, millennia. And that is very improbable considering the recent population admixtures from both other areas of Africa, Europe, considering Roman and Greek colonization, and the Islamic expansion. Even without genetic proof, it would be very unlikely to expect such a perfect continuity between ancient Egyptians and modern Egyptians, and this study in fact demonstrates so.
I like that he mentions that the modern population of Egypt is not likely to be a continuity of the ancient one. We've got to give him that one. I agree.
166 samples from 151 mummified individuals were examined for this study, 90 of which you will find in the later analysis in the supplementary data 1. According to radiocarbon dates, these samples can be classified into 3 time periods: pre-Ptolemaic, Ptolemaic, and Roman period. Scientists found that the 3 ancient Egyptian group clusters supported a certain level of genetic continuity over 1300 years, but showed a higher affinity with modern-day people from the Levant and the Middle East, an affinity supported on some of the individuals with the find of the Y chromosome haplogroups. On the nuclear level, scientists joined their data, called the SNP data, together with both ancient genomes and modern-day genomes, and found that the ancient Egyptian samples were further away from modern-day Egyptians and closer to the modern-day Near Easterners and Europeans. The scientists that performed these tests were extremely professional, but you can imagine that both Afrocentric groups and Eurocentric groups tried to use these and tackle these differently.
Right. The study that everyone likes to brandish to show that the ancient Egyptians weren't black. Lol. See Metatron, the study is indeed full of useful data that no one would deny. The only problems we have with that study are the conclusions they make based on their biased assumptions and the samples they used. I debunked their conclusions and highlighted issues with the study in this video here. Please go check it out. That scientific study is flawed. And I'm not the only person saying this, there are many people out there who said this. The main issue with it was the location of the samples they used. Those scientists took a bunch of mummies from one location in Lower Egypt and then went on to conclude that the entire population of all of ancient Egyptian history resembled Anatolians, and that the sub-Saharan gene flow came later, probably through slavery. A very flawed conclusion, if you didn't notice it, especially since they know themselves that Egypt had several ethnicities living there. This could just be a bunch of Anatolians naturalized Egyptians, just like there are Indians who are naturalized Americans. Ancient Egypt is 3,000 years of history, plus a pre-dynastic period that lasted about 2,000 years. So how can you then conclude from one location that the whole population that you did not test on was the same as that one in that location? Especially the time period that the samples are from. Most of the samples used in the study are from the Ptolemaic period. Do you not know what happened when Alexander the Great conquered Egypt? He urged his soldiers, he urged his people to move to ancient Egypt, to mix in the population, basically to take over the towns and cities. Here is Professor Christopher Ehret, a linguist expert on the Afro-Asiatic language family, exposing the fallacy of the study.
This is just going off here for a second. Some of you may have seen or heard about a recent genetics article that makes the ancient Egyptians out to be Levantines. Let me be very clear, these findings come from one locale in a large stretch of possible locales in northern Egypt, and the finds date well after the foundational periods of ancient Egypt. It's somewhat as if, I was thinking of this particular image, rather than investigating DNA from a 17th century cemetery in Plymouth, We instead choose to investigate DNA from a later 19th century cemetery in South Boston. And then we conclude, having done that the United States was founded by people of Irish descent, and that Americans were predominantly predominantly Irish.
Right, the study is flawed. Why not do the same study on all regions of ancient Egypt, and instead of focusing on their haplotypes, we instead focus on the genotype, such as the melanin content in their skin. This can easily be done because they've done so with ancient, like much older skulls. I mean, skulls from Europe. They discovered that a skeleton from Europe had dark skin. How did they do it? Can they do it with the mummies? They are far more recent than those 20,000-year-old skulls from Europe. Why don't you do that? Why isn't anybody willing to study the genotypes of the mummies? Anybody wants to do it? Anyone? Is it only Dr. Diop? The rest? Want to give it a try? No? Anyone? That's what I thought. Anyhow, also Metatron, there are physical anthropological studies that have been conducted on ancient Egyptian skeletons, and guess what? They all claim that they bear striking resemblance with black Africans further south. Even King Tutankhamun, who's been depicted as a Eurasian, while his skull was described as being African, and his depictions show brown skin, not a pale skin such as that of the Eurasians. I mean, it's quite hilarious to see. Right, so this man's skull is described as African, his skin is brown, depicted by his artist from ancient times. People who saw him painted him as brown as they get, and then somehow the reconstruction gives you a pale skin, like I mean real pale skin Asian man. Come on. So by all anthropological studies, the ancient Egyptians bear striking resemblance with black Africans further south, meaning they cluster with the sub-Saharan Africans. In case you don't believe me, Metatron or his viewers or anyone out there, a study by Sonia 2003 was conducted on some Badarian skeletal remains, and it showed that their proportions were super negroid. Super negroid. In her own words. I'm quoting here. Super negroid. That means their limb proportion and other proportions were super adapted to a warm climate. That's what a negroid means. Someone who's adapted to warm climate, because you know our skin is dark because we have to protect it against the UV rays. Our limbs are big because we have to release more heat quicker than others. That is why. So when the Egyptians are super negroid, you think the Dinka people of the Sudan. So please, Metatron, do some more research and give a read to both sides of the argument as a true critical thinker would. Do not only stop at what some guy said on the internet and on Twitter and make it seem like that is what everyone who says ancient Egypt was black thinks. I believe we call that a strawman argument. And in your own words,
not how you do real and professional academic work.
Right. There are scholars who argued about this question. Give a read to their arguments. You say you care about the truth, then prove it by doing proper research and representing arguments properly instead of strawmanning. I mean, did you know that UNESCO organized a debate on this very subject with experts from all over the world arguing against two Africans? Guess who won that debate? It was the two Africans who were arguing that ancient Egypt was of black African origin. Did you know this? Did you do your research? I mean, this is mentioned in a Wikipedia article. A video on that debate is coming on my channel since the original audios and tapes of that debate are being hidden. Nowhere to be found. I mean, nowhere. But at least we have a report in the second volume of the General History of Africa, so that's something. And at last, Metatron says this.
I think that most studies on mummies will probably reveal that the southern part of Egypt had a higher percentage of individuals that we would today call black, and I'm still inclined to believe that the majority of the Egyptian population would have been the tanned, olive-skinned people.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
I have to disagree there. I have to strongly disagree. The archaeological evidence does not support this at all. The overwhelming amount of evidence shows that the skin of the ancient Egyptians was brown to dark brown, with some exceptions of olive skin here and there, but the majority did not have olive skin. The overwhelming amount of wall paintings and statues and figurines, wooden figurines, are not painted with olive skin, which is basically something bordering yellow of the Asiatic peoples. The ancient Egyptians depicted the Asiatic peoples, and the differences can clearly be noticed, as you can see over here. The Metatron is clearly biased against people who claim ancient Egypt was black because he thinks that everyone who says that must be an Afrocentrist who does not care about historical facts, since that is how they misrepresent the movement that was known as Afrocentricity that they now call Afrocentrism. But the true proponents of that movement call it Afrocentricity, not Afrocentrism. So there's a difference there. So he's talking about the Afrocentrist of the Afrocentrism circle that they defined. You know, I believe the term was coined by Professor Lefkowitz in her book, Not Out of Africa, you know, a review of Black Athena something. Well, Metatron, not all people who claim ancient Egypt was black are like that. Not all people who claim ancient Egypt was black are Afrocentrist or are people who don't care about historical facts. I mean, are you gonna call this French priest who wrote a book compiling the evidence for a black African ancient Egypt before the Africans ever did anything on this subject? Is he an Afrocentrist too? I mean, here is an expert, Count de Volney, expert of the Orient, goes to ancient Egypt, sees the monument, and cannot conclude otherwise. He says, yes, ancient Egypt was black. You know what else he said? He said something along the lines, I cannot believe that this race that is our slave today was at the origin of the greatest ancient civilization ever. And it is a shame that the United States, who claim to be this land of freedom and equality, but they are there enslaving another bunch of human beings just like them, that are just as equal as they are. Volney, that is Volney. I'll put the quotes there, you can pause to read if you want. So again, was he an Afrocentrist too, Metatron? When all the European scholars of the 1700s agreed, they reached a consensus that ancient Egypt was a black African civilization. End of discussion. And this Champollion Figeac came and said, no, with some crappy arguments. Were they all Afrocentrist when they did that? Are you even aware they exist? Do some more research, please. You failed to show in your video that not all people who claim ancient Egypt was black are Afrocentrists who just don't care about historical facts. Instead, you focus on the ones who make extreme claims on Twitter and make it seem as if that is what all people who believe ancient Egypt was black are like. That is dishonest, to be honest. That is a dishonest move. I'll let the people compare olive skin complexion with the skin complexion of the ancient Egyptian wall paintings and statues. They'll be the judge, provided that they have proper eyesight. I'm just kidding here, people. I trust you have proper eyesight. You know, you're on YouTube. Sometimes it's for listening, but mostly it's for visual content, right? So you probably have proper eyesight. So please judge properly with your eyes, not through blinkers. Just kidding here. Unlike Metatron there, I do not believe that the coloration present on wall paintings is the depiction of a tan. There is actually plenty of evidence that indicates that the coloration is an actual one. It depicts the actual skin complexion of the Egyptians. So with that said, I would like to show you the coloration of Egyptian wall paintings and the actual coloration of olive skin that the Metatron is talking about. Alright, see the difference? Right, olive skin man. Metatron, I hope you do better than this should you choose to speak on this issue again. If not, please leave this issue alone. Please leave the subject alone. If you aren't willing to do the necessary research for it, I would actually prefer that you leave it alone. You're a very busy man and I understand that. You don't have time to do all this research. Just keep talking about Roman armies and weaponry from ancient cultures all over the world. Just keep doing that. You do it well. You do it quite well. I liked your video on African swords. That was a good one. I liked it. But this one, nah, poorly researched. Alright folks, that's it for today's video. If you liked it, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to my channel if you're new here. Peace.